Hello, fellow citizens! I am your host, Jess, and this is your reminder that the weight of the entire world is not on your shoulders, and you can make a difference. This podcast is about what it means to be a citizen and neighbor where you live. For me, that's Philadelphia. There are lots of ways to be a citizen and a neighbor, and I want to cover all of them in this podcast, starting with the belief that citizens should be informed. Because of our current nationwide agenda, I'm kicking off the podcast by examining the candidates and roles on the 2020 general election ballot. Today, I'm joined by somebody who I grew up with, and then we weren't near each other, and now we both live in Philadelphia, which I think is just mind-blowing. She is one of the sweetest people who I know, so I'm really glad that today I'm talking with Rachel.
Hi. Yes.
How excited are you to be on this? Are you sweating with excitement or with nerves?
Maybe both. I'm excited that this exists and that you're doing this, and then I'm sweating because I'm a little nervous that, I'm on video.
I hear
But
you.
excited to chat with you.
Yay! Well, we're going to kick it off so that the listeners know a little bit more about you. So, Rachel, can you tell us where all you have lived?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Central Jersey, which is actually how me and Jess met. We have family friends, and we were in Girl Scouts and all that good stuff together. And then, yeah, we kind of lived in different places. I went to high school in Lehigh Valley area of Pennsylvania. And then just within the past couple years, I moved to Philly, and Jess was living here too. And we kind of reconnected, and now we're back at it being Philly girls.
Yes. Well, speaking of being back at it, this is such a weird time that we're not doing things we used to do. So how are you spending your time these days?
So yeah, speaking of that, I can't wait for post-pandemic life in the city and enjoying everything it has to offer, because we've definitely been adapting and trying to do different things. I love music, I love art. I love just even going out dancing and stuff. So it's tough not going to a live show, but lately I've just been at home trying to create, and I've been crafting, doing DIYs, making earrings, going to the thrift store, just anything to just be creative and have fun. So just waiting until the day I can be out again in the city.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was actually just talking to somebody recently. She works in the social service kind of aspect of things, and she was like, I need to find a creative outlet. I'm just so into work, especially working from home. Your computer is kind of always taunting you, and so I'm glad that you're in it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When your computer is in your bedroom, you're like, how do I ever get away from it and rest?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
So now that I dragged you into doing this ballot stuff, how long have you been voting?
So kind of on and off. I voted in the last election, and then I believe I almost can't even remember. I think I voted in 2016 and 2008 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It's honestly such a blur, just because I feel I was always overwhelmed with information and family influences and other people's opinions that they kind of don't make a impact on me. I don't really remember exactly. But this year, pretty much, it was the first time I ever voted in the primaries, and really researched everything hard myself, and feel I really owned it, and did my duty and voted how I felt fit and all that. So yeah, it's maybe a late coming type of thing, and I really admire kids who are young and are so aware of their right to vote, and are so well informed, because I definitely don't feel I was that way when I was younger. So
yeah, you mentioned that we did Girl Scouts together, and our mutual friend Jen Massarino, she has a niece who's in Girl Scouts right now, and she just messaged me yesterday, and she was like, I have to talk about the government with her to earn a badge. And I'm
wow.
I don't remember us doing that. And also this girl is probably 8 or 9 years old. I'm like, is that gonna really stick? Do they need to do that badge right now? I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of wow, is she gonna grasp that? But at the same time though, I'm wow, I would have loved to be like forced this upon me a little bit, like maybe earlier. But
Hmm.
it's okay. I think the younger generation definitely has their priorities in new and really like great places. So that's awesome. But yeah, I can't say that I remember doing a government badge ever.
Right. Yeah, I hope that's the case. I just saw somebody I know I follow on Instagram. She turned 18 this year and she just voted today. So
Oh,
I was
awesome.
like, good for you.
Yeah. Oh,
Which
that really.
I wonder if social media has an influence on that because like I always say, especially since I started researching for this podcast, is I'm like I want people to get educated before they vote, not just vote. And so I
Yeah.
wonder if so many younger kids now are on the socials and like see all these posts about getting out to vote that they're just doing it, and which I think is okay for your first one.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I really do think it is like has a lot to do with social media and maybe like even how they joke about like TikTok generation and all that stuff because I think like voting and all of these like like civic duties are becoming almost like trendy, which is like so interesting,
Mhm.
but I'm here for like if that's what it takes for people to get involved and want to do it, then okay, let's make like voting trendy, I guess. I don't know.
Right. So
Yeah.
I am gonna guess that you don't get all your information from social media. Do you consider yourself informed on a local level?
Yeah, I would say so, like a little bit, like to some degree, like I can absolutely do more. I mean, in the times we're in right now, like the news is a little bit like overbearing, a little overwhelming. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes like I avoid it on TV, but I think just being in the city and seeing things or walking around like town or whatever, or just like word of mouth, I feel like is how I hear about things a lot. Like, if something happens in someone's neighborhood, or if someone reads something on Twitter, or if like I'm just talking to a friend, I feel like that is kind of how I find things
Mm-hmm.
out, and then I'll research it. I'll be like, oh, that's really interesting, I wonder about that, and I'll kind of look into it. So maybe that's a little bit unconventional. I don't know that I have like one news source. It's sort of like it's so in our faces right now that I just find myself like if a particular topic is really like jumping out to me, I'll maybe be like, okay, I think I'm gonna like get a book about that, or I'm gonna read about that, or research it, or something. So that's kind
I
of how
think
I.
you bring up a really good point, and this is kind of like what I want to talk about after the elections when I have guests on. Is do you feel that way now in Philly, but was it also that way before you moved here? Because you lived in a bit of like a suburban kind of like rural area.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I agree. It's totally a Philly thing. I think it's like feeling part of community, feeling sort of like responsible for your like neighborhood, and the fact that in a rural area, maybe back home, if I was like walking or going to the store, I think I'd be interacting with way less people. Whereas here, it's kind of hard not to go outside and see somebody or talk to somebody, or even pass by maybe something on the street, someone handing something out for you to register to
Mm-hmm.
vote. Way more in your face than it ever was at home, like back home.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do agree. I think it does have something to do with being in the city, definitely.
Yeah, and like we're a huge city, like this is where it all started. So
Yeah.
it's a lot. I think it should be more pressure than maybe for some people it is, but again, it just comes down to how much time you have on your hands. I have a lot of time on my hands, which is why I'm doing this, and so I'm glad you could join me. Speaking
Yeah.
about speaking of time, how much time would you say you put into researching like your whole ballot or even just today?
Even just today, like us thinking about these questions and looking at like different uh sides to it all and everything, it definitely took me a couple hours to look
Mhm.
up. And I think that was definitely like surface level. Like I could have easily delved in way more. Like that the one document you sent me, a PDF from like the Philadelphia campaign, was literally like hundreds of pages long, like outline, and
Yeah.
I'll skim this one for sure.
Yeah. Oh,
But
you can probably hear the dirt bikes outside my house
oh
right
my
now.
god,
So.
so fun.
We're really in Philly, guys. I'm not kidding. This is
Real.
recording from your home studio, which is just a closet. But well, before 100 more dirt bikes come by, maybe we should get into it.
Sure, yeah, let's do it.
So I'm going to read the question the way that it's on the ballot, and then I'm going to let Rachel really dive into it and share what she learned as a fellow citizen. So, question number 2 on the PA ballot reads, shall the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter be amended to create the Office of the Victim Advocate to advocate for crime victims and to work with crime services providers to coordinate, plan, train, educate, and investigate issues relating to crime victims? There's a lot in there.
Yeah, so definitely when I first read that, I was like, okay, a lot of words I'm gonna have to Google. I was like, seems interesting, like advocating for victims of crime. Okay, I'm on board. This has piqued my interest. But first things first, I think we had to unpack what Philadelphia Home Rule Charter even was. So from my understanding, it is basically just a campaign in local government that's specifically run in Philadelphia. So that's your local government and how they can act within state laws, but also just things that only are specific to Philly. So that was adopted in 1951. And like I said, to my understanding, that exists so that Philadelphia itself can address issues that don't really relate to the rest of the state. And that was kind of that funny, really, really long document that we were reading through that has been amended 100 times, which is awesome. Glad to see them keeping it up to date. And while I was reading through there, it just seemed like pretty much any question you had about being a resident in Philadelphia and what you can do, what you can't do, what your rights are, what codes are, went from anything from like housing safety to traffic to parks and rec. So definitely really interesting and something I maybe didn't even know that was available for public stuff. So that was really awesome. So they are basically gonna make the rule, and if this gets passed and everybody votes to include this, that it will be the victim advocates will be added to this Philadelphia Home Rule Charter. So that's what that first part is of the question.
Part 1.
I know. I'm like, what are we adding and where to? So then again, as I understand it, is victims advocate kind of relates closely to Marsy's law, which is already in effect. And Marsy's law was enacted when a woman, Marsy Nicholas, was killed by her ex-boyfriend in 1983. And then her family was then later confronted in the grocery store by the killer, as he was released on bail. So the family basically had no idea that he was out on bail, obviously felt very affronted, had something very traumatic happen to them. And then they felt, not really represented because they had no idea that this person was even out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how this relates to victims advocate. So in addition to your regular Declaration of Rights, Marsy's law and victims advocates are supposed to kind of outline more in-depth treatment for victims. So it would go into things about just like fairness and the safety and the respect. And it would include things sort of about maybe protecting the people who have accused the defendant, returning their possessions back to them promptly if it's not evidence. So things that you maybe wouldn't think of, but for a family that, wants to know if they're, if the defendant is out and about and free to hopefully, not harass them and things like that. So when I was reading about this, it just seemed really essential that, the victim's rights would be kind of met by the defendant's rights, because the defendant, you're, I'll just start one more time. I'm rambling. So the defendant, the whole purpose of that is if you're accused of something and you're being defended, you're innocent until proven guilty. So the defendant has a lot of rights under the law, and they felt that it was very obvious that the victim has rights, but those things weren't really outlined or available for the victim. So they might not know all this information. And then in this time of like turmoil, not really even be equipped, like maybe mentally or financially, to seek this out and kind of know their rights and what is like wrongful or whatnot and being done to them.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point of people just like knowing what their rights are. We do
Mm-hmm.
have so many rights, and I think that's part of the reason why we don't know all of our rights.
Yeah, I do agree. And that comes back to like Girl Scouts, whereas like maybe I should Girl Scouts. I don't know. Like,
Right.
um,
Yeah, so this was really interesting because everything you're saying just sounds like, well, yeah, of course. Like, why wouldn't we want that? But there are people opposed to this, which is really interesting. But first, I want to
mhm,
point out so, this is what we're voting on in this ballot refers to the Philadelphia Constitution. This already exists in Pennsylvania as a state. This is a thing. There are nonprofit organizations, there are resources that do provide this service. But really, if we can get this on the Philly level, then there's an office in City Hall in actual Philadelphia, which is going to
mhm.
have services that are accessible because there's a lot of crime happening in Philly. And if our main resource is in Harrisburg, it's not the most accessible to maybe get FaceTime.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like some things while I was reading that even came up that this could include and maybe like help victims was like even a victim knowing ahead of time when they need to appear in front of a judge and how will they get there and what if they don't have transportation and just a lot of things that maybe citizens like us don't think of because, we are lucky to have that luxury or at
Mm-hmm.
least have someone to help us or figure it out, but not obviously not everybody does. And especially if you're faced in a situation like this, it's great to know that, you may have a public defender, but it's not, that really isn't someone that's going to be able to have the resources to sort of educate you on what your rights are. I would say
Yes.
that.
Yeah, so the Pennsylvania level of the Victims Advocate Office,
Mhm,
you can register with it. It's accessible, and they make it a law that your defender has to tell you about the Office of the Victims Advocacy, and that you have the
mhm.
option to register with them. But like I said, there's some people who don't want this to pass, which I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, I'm
And
curious. I'm genuinely curious, why? Because from my perspective, if I were in that position, I would, obviously want all the support I could get, especially if I felt there was wrongdoing against me. So I'm
so,
curious.
yeah, when I read these oppositions, I think that the way that these are worded or are more so for to be read by citizens who they know are not going to do the research, because I read these and it seems like it pertains more to like being in court at a case hearing, but the victim's advocate will always be with you from
Hmm.
start, but more so even after a case. Like that's actually more of the focus. So there is a president of the Pennsylvania Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. This is Bradley Winnick, and he was quoted as saying a 230-year-old due process right is being trampled on by someone who has done nothing but make an allegation. And I was like, yikes.
Yeah, that makes me feel a little cringy. I don't know.
Because the victim's advocate pertains to any crime, really. And so that can be like sexual assault, gun violence, like a lot of different areas. So when I read that, it really reminded me of like the Me Too movement, and it's really hard to like sometimes make a case for something like that. There's
Yeah,
just
absolutely. And like you brought up that this victim's advocate is supposed to protect you like after your case even. So even if there isn't a charge on the person, the defendant, that this person, the victim's advocate, is to help you still stay safe, that the accused,
Mm-hmm.
be near you or your family or cause trouble for you even after the accusation or whatever it is. So it's kind of like a protection from you during and after the case. So yeah, like you said, I thought that was very interesting, and it almost wasn't even about the outcome at times. It was just more so
Right.
for someone to have the resource to say, this is happening to me. It doesn't feel right. Is that right? Do I have rights here? Like, what do I do? So, and I think we
Yeah.
all have questions and can try to Google it, but it's kind of hard.
Yeah, because I think the hard part is that they're not trying to say, like, by having an Office of Victims Advocates, they're not saying, like, we're always siding with the victim and the person that's being defended is always the bad guy. Because then there's another source, there's a source called the Citizen's Voice,
Mm,
and it's the way that they wrote the opposition. It says the opponents of Marsy's law make valid points that most of the protections included in the measure are already law in Pennsylvania, and
mm.
that the expanded victims' rights it contains could conflict with those granted to defendants. Defendants' rights are not in place to coddle criminals. They are rights possessed by all citizens to defend themselves against the power of the state. And that's great that you have rights as somebody accused of a crime.
Yeah. So when you read that, I kind of think that it's, so say I'm accused of something, right or wrong, it's kind of saying that I too have the rights until I'm proven innocent or guilty too.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I read that.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't imagine both being bad. I see how that maybe would get complicated, but that's
Yeah.
sort of the whole point of like getting in front of a judge and having him sort out the details and figure out what's really going on in a situation.
Right.
So yeah, no, it does seem pretty complicated though, that if like, the accused sort of also feels like the victim, and then yeah, what happens then? It's like victims advocate for defendants, and I get how that's tough, but um I don't know, but why not keep everybody sort of safe and fair, but while things are being decided upon.
Yeah. And this is something that's been on ballots before. This is, I mean, Marcy's law already is enacted in other states. It just sometimes it takes a while because you do have to actually follow a certain language when you're putting something on a bill, which I thought was really interesting that this has kind of been a struggle for some places. So it passed first in California as Prop 9 in 2008, but I was really interested to see it only got 54% of the vote, so that's like super close.
Yeah.
Um, and then sometimes it's pulled from the ballot because the amendment, quote, violates the state constitution's requirement that separate amendments receive separate votes. So that just comes down to the way that it's worded on the ballot, because this was actually on Pennsylvania's ballot last year, and then they like stopped counting the votes because there was this, it was challenged that, like it says, it's like it wasn't put on there as separate amendments getting separate votes. I don't, as like a common citizen, I don't get it.
Yeah, it's like such a shame because it seems like, I think I read that too, that it was saying something of like a 70% approval rating or
Yeah.
something, that ultimately the citizens decided, yes, we do want this, but like you're saying, the way it was worded, it had to be stopped, which um yeah, I mean, I don't understand the ins and outs of like how something needs to be presented, but it seems like a shame if, they're giving it another go, almost hopefully with the right wording or however
Yeah.
they want to.
Yeah. I hope it's done right this time.
Yeah, it just seems so like, yeah, man, I really commend these like legal writers. It seems so complicated to get it like approved by everyone, and it seems.
Yeah, so I thought the interesting thing was with a lot of questions, they'll talk about like, oh, well, the no includes how much it's going to cost. This one, they don't say anything about how much it's going to cost, even though like something like this already exists. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I was trying to find that as well, and from what I inferred, it kind of seemed like maybe some groups' issues with it were that it was going to be the victim advocate, like head, I suppose, whatever you want to call their position, was going to be appointed by the mayor, like chosen by them.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
could assume.
So there's that's a
Yeah,
hot topic right now. So that title is just called victim advocate, which I think is really interesting that that's the title. Um,
yeah,
so right now, the victim advocate is Jennifer Storm. She actually, her history is that she was, I want to say she was raped, but she did at least she was on the receiving end of sexual abuse as a child. And then
okay.
as she grew up, unfortunately, she turned to self harm and drug abuse. And then she did recover. And so when she was older and this became a thing, she knew that like this was for her. Like she wanted to be part of
Wow.
something that represents the victims. She does not come from a law or legal background.
Okay.
And she's been in this is a 6-year term. She's the victim advocate for Pennsylvania as a whole,
Okay.
the Pennsylvania level of it. And now is the time where the Senate is supposed to appoint a new or reinstate the victim advocate.
Hmm.
And there's a big argument about whether it's going to be her, and also can they pass a bill that says that you have to have um, a background in law in order to hold this position. And she
Hmm.
doesn't have that. And people are saying that there's people in the Senate who just don't want her in this position. And that's why they want
Yeah.
to pass this bill. And unfortunately, it just seemed what I was reading was that she's just like doesn't say things in the most like professional manner.
Hmm.
Which I'm always like, well, yeah, that would be me too. Like, I'm just really passionate about things. I can't be concerned with your
Your
feelings.
No, I'm with you. Yeah, feel I feel really torn about the fact of them saying that you need a degree in law to hold this position. I feel really torn about that because not everybody has access to that, and it doesn't
Mm.
mean that they don't have the capability to hold this position and do it well. So I don't know.
And because,
I don't
like
know.
we said, this isn't about you representing a victim in court. It's
Yeah,
nothing about being in court. And you're not, as the victim's advocate, you cannot even provide legal guidance.
yeah, so that becomes like a question of, do you want somebody with legal experience, or do you want somebody that can sympathize with this person and what they've been through, and, you know, educate them on how to help them, because all they're going to do is be the liaison in a
Right.
sense.
Yeah, because they have a staff under them. Like, yeah, that's the victim advocate, but just like we have an attorney general, they're
Hmm.
not the one covering the entire state's legal system. Like, they have this huge team underneath them.
Yeah, it
So,
seems very sticky. Yeah, I don't know about that. And I feel like when I was reading, it seemed like it was less about, in my opinion, who knows?
yeah.
It seemed less about the actual passing of this and putting it into the charter. And it
Mm
seemed more about who was going to be appointed
hmm.
and that
Mm hmm.
be choosing it. And I mean, I don't have much info on that, but I can understand that if somebody didn't, agreed or disagreed with the mayor, then they would be agreeing or disagreeing with who he chose for the victim advocate. So I feel like that's maybe why some people have.
Yeah,
um
so that's a really good point because so if we pass this into the Philadelphia charter and we have an office of the victim advocate, then we will have our own victim advocate as the city of Philadelphia.
mhm.
So then the bill, it seems to me, and I'm reading this as a common citizen, so maybe I'm misconstruing it. It seems to me that if the Senate passes this state bill saying
Yes.
that the Pennsylvania's VA has to have a background in law, if we put this into our constitution as Philadelphia, we're not necessarily following that.
True, because like we were talking about earlier, the Philadelphia charter kind of has its own like metrics of how it measures
Yeah.
the law, because it's very specific to the city. So yeah, man, loaded stuff.
We figured it out.
I hope. I don't know.
I hope. Yeah, this was interesting. So in the same article that I read about this like hot topic of whether or not Jen Storm will continue to be the VA, there was a quote from Senator Sharif Street from Philadelphia. He's District 3, which seems to cover a lot of North Philly, like the Temple area, and then also some sections of West Philadelphia. But he said he believes that Jen Storm has failed to advocate for people victimized by gun violence, including many in communities he represents. Street said he's spoken to Storm several times about his concerns, and he believes that a lawyer might bring a more nuanced view to the job. I don't see how a lawyer will, but I'm just glad that he points that out, because then I would hope that he is for this question number 2 on the ballot getting a yes vote.
Yeah, agreed. So again, I feel like it seems like it's more about people are more concerned about the person, whereas they are for the victim advocacy department and head, but it seems like they're more concerned about the person, which is fair. I mean, if they're going to create this in Philadelphia and they want to have the right person on the job, I mean, that seems like a deeper level that they're going to have to examine and find the right person for it.
Yeah, these are exciting times. I mean, a lot is going to have to happen after this ballot. Who's to say like how fast it's going to happen? But
True. Oh my gosh, don't even. I have no idea about that even.
Are you there?
Oh wait, I'm here. Don't worry.
Oh, okay. So I just want to talk about what the Office of Victim Advocates even offers. I went to the Pennsylvania level one to get a better understanding of this. And something really cool is that they post annual reports.
Okay.
They're not required by law to do that. So I think that's really cool of them.
Yeah, no, really interesting and pretty like transparent.
Yeah. So the first thing that they talk about is what exactly is the OVA. And so the basis is that if you're registered with the Office of the Victim's Advocate, which your DA will tell you about, or if your case doesn't even go to court, you can seek this out yourself and register. And they're supposed to notify, because that's another thing too, is like not all cases go to even court, or like the police doesn't even make it a case, whatever. But if you register, then you are to receive notifications of the movement of an offender.
Okay.
And are provided opportunity to give input when the offender is being reviewed for parole eligibility, which I think you see that sometimes on like law shows.
Yeah.
So that might sound familiar to some people.
Which like I love those, but I'm like, this is like fiction, right? I'm like, I don't know.
It's hard. Yeah, if you don't know everything that you're supposed to know, then yeah, you don't know what's fiction and what's real.
I know.
I know I saw recently, like, we binged How to Get Away with Murder.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I used to watch that too. Really good.
So good. And on one of the later seasons, they talked about how if you're the family of a victim, so in this case, it was a boy who had been shot, he died, but his mother wanted to confer with the guy who shot her son. And she just wanted to talk to him privately, with lawyers, there. It was recorded and everything. And I just thought that was really important that, like, I never knew that was a thing. That, like, in court, on record, you can talk to them, be like, I just want to understand, like, do you understand what you did? How do you feel about it? Because then that reflects to the judge how they're going to rule.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like another, like, are they going to express, remorse? Are they going to say they're sorry? Like, how are they going to react to this person? And then that just, yeah, exactly. It's like almost like more evidence in a sense.
Yeah. So so now that actually segues us to the next, the next thing that you get if you're registered as they also call it a survivor. You don't have to be called a victim. You can be called a survivor, which I think is a nice word. So
I agree.
They have what's called the Inmate Apology Bank, and that was created for survivors who are interested in receiving an apology letter from the offender in their case. The Inmate Apology Bank allows letters to be written and received without violating policies that prohibit offenders from contacting survivors. The only thing is, unfortunately, not many of these letters have been delivered to the survivors. I don't understand that.
Yeah, and is it requested from the survivor?
Yeah, so they're saying that like 2,831 of the survivors have registered that yes, they want to be part of this program.
Oh,
Let me see if I can pull up really quick cuz I think I also found
and I think you
how
said,
many letters are even like written. Oh my god, guys, I have so many tabs
I,
open. Oh, okay, here we go. So I'm going to the 2018-2019 fiscal year report for Pennsylvania's Office of Victim Advocate. Oh my god, Rachel, it's taking so long to
oh
load.
no.
Page 1 of 12. Okay. So it's not even that big of a report. Like anybody could go read this. Okay. So people can write their letters and it says total letters on file that would be connected to a registered victim,
Okay.
2,831 letters. But only 418 of those letters have been delivered to date.
Yeah,
So
so
I'm not sure if that's because part of those are not part of the, like, they don't correspond to victims who want to receive a letter, maybe. So,
yeah,
maybe in the prison system, people are writing the letters, but they're not wanting to be received.
yeah, interesting. Or if, like you said, it may be that's why there's a need for this type of office because maybe they're not delivered because of just like, you know, time to kind of handle that type of thing.
Right, because Pennsylvania is a humongous state.
So big, so big.
And if you
Yeah.
go to like the last page of this fiscal report, they list their staff and it is not a big staff. So,
Yeah. 'Cause I can't imagine. I'm sure they have so much to do, and I can't imagine that like getting that letter in the mail is hitting the top of their priority, unfortunately.
yeah. Do you want to read the next one?
Yeah, sure. So next section would be Address Confidentiality Program. So that's called the ACP. And this is also available to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, as well as stalking, um, which could have been conducted by their household members. So this program is going to provide an alternate mailing address to keep their actual home address out of the public, um, where the perpetrator cannot find their location. So that program entails a level of advocacy that includes speaking to employers, schools, Department of Motor Vehicles, all other states, et cetera. And that pertains to keeping the victims and survivors' addresses confidential. So that's like many people that have, unfortunately, these violations against them from people that they know or in their household. So that's a whole nother level that you never even think of, that how am I supposed to receive my information if I don't feel safe if it's coming to my home.
Yeah, I think this one is huge.
I agree.
And you made such a good point earlier. Like, if you've never been a victim before, like, you don't think about these things until it
No.
happens.
Yeah, and then I feel, that trauma that you have, then I don't imagine you're thinking so clearly. I mean, not everybody, I'm sure people's, responses are different, but I think it definitely is good to have someone in your corner, supporting you, helping guide you the right way, because that's very an emotional thing to go through.
Yeah, and this keeps you safe for years. It's not just like, okay, the court hearing is over, we're going to give you like a year of our help. Like, no, this is a process. Like, you always have to be protected.
Yeah.
There's so many services offered by this. So the last thing we'll cover, it's not everything, but the last thing we're going to cover, it says the OVA has an advocate dedicated to providing free and confidential services to anyone who has an active or pending criminal case where they are identified as the crime victim / survivor, or anyone who is physically assaulted while incarcerated or working in a state facility, which I thought was really interesting. Like, I just feel like those are people we don't often think about being in this situation.
Yeah, wow, completely agree. Like, imagine if that is your job.
Oh my
So,
God.
in a sense, that's like, there's only so much your HR department or something can do for you, you know?
Hmm. Well, so that's all of it. Do you think we covered it all?
I think like some really like, good top level stuff.
We
I
covered
think
a good
so.
chunk. I think yeah, I agree cuz there's a lot cuz like the other side of this is like, well, what are the defendant's rights? Like what is your right when you're accused of a crime? But
Hmm.
I don't think that they butt heads. I don't know. So,
I know, and that's what I was reading about a little bit too, was basically like how some of these things can clash because, until you get into the court and have the judge sort it out, who's to say what's what? But I'm with you. If either party's feeling, they need to protect their safety and they need support, then it seems like a great asset and a great tool for the city to have, especially if, like you said, it's something that the state has, but all the way in Harrisburg and with a seemingly little staff.
mhm.
And then whatever our Philadelphia advocate would be like you mentioned, it would have its own set of crimes and things that they would focus on rather than just what the whole state made.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's one more thing I want to mention. Billy Penn is one that I'm looking at more now. Like that's a I only
Oh,
ever read their online articles. I don't know if they do print, but
mhm.
they had an article actually recently that covers this whole debate. They're really good if you're looking like for the procrastinator's guide to the ballots, which I think is great. So they had an article about this and it they talked about a couple different people and one of them was Vincent Thompson. So he's council member Kenyatta Johnson's communications director. So he acknowledged that the police department, the DA's office, and numerous nonprofits provide different types of victim outreach. But the proposed office, he said, would act as a one-stop clearinghouse. He said, quote, the office would also be able to facilitate technical assistance and training for agencies that regularly interact with victims and co-victims. So it's not just for the survivors, it's also for the workers, which I think is
Yeah,
great.
yeah, absolutely. There's so many levels of support that you can give, and that if that's like helping the rest of the staff, then yeah, that's also necessary for everyone's.
Yeah. Especially during this time when like some people are learning computers for the first time.
Yeah, especially, I mean, cue back to us earlier where I'm like, my video is not working. Help. I'm supposed to get this.
Right. Rachel's on her iPad right now. I'm glad you're not just like on your cell phone because that might be tricky.
Yeah, no, I would be like a tiny little rectangle.
I think we deserved that laugh after all that research.
Yeah, ooh, I agree. I learned a lot, but I think there's still a lot more to learn, but I feel more informed now.
Yeah, I want to bring you back on after if we like when there's any movement on this and I think it'll be fun to track it and this will kind of be like your little zone of specialty.
Yeah, no, I agree. And now I feel like if I am watching the news or listening about this, I'm going to be very interested and very informed and be able to talk to, my fellow friends and I'll have one little tidbit to give them to help them not have to research this because we already did it.
Right. So, Rachel, how are you being neighborly these days?
Well, in a pandemic, it's a little tough, maybe trying to smile through my
Yeah.
mask more. But
Mhm.
I recently tried to apply to be a poll worker. So that's where I thought I could do my civic duty and not only vote, but maybe help other people have access to voting. So I'm waiting this week to see if I get approved for that. So that would be awesome. And I would love to do that for my community. So
Did you get a mail-in ballot?
yeah, I did get a mail in and I held off on it a little bit because I wasn't sure about mailing it. But now with all the ballot drop boxes and everything, I'm gonna do that. But I did
Okay.
for anybody that wants to know that you can bring your mail-in ballot to the polls if you decide you want to vote that day. So you got all the options to vote.
I'm gonna go to drop mine off this Monday. Do you want to go with me?
Yeah, that'd be great. I would love that. Oh my God. Oh my God, we'll make a to-do of it.
Oh, I'm really excited. Like, it's right by the Starbucks that's next to the Sprouts. And so I think we should get our Starbucks, and then we're gonna maybe wait in line. I don't know if there's gonna be like a big line like during the day on a Monday.
Either way, you sold me with a coffee, so I'm in.
Perfect. I'm so glad.
That gives me forward to. I'm excited. Let's do it.
And we're gonna get our sticker.
Oh gosh, yes. For the sticker, the gram.
Yeah, for the gram. It's true.
Everybody else to vote.
I think I'm gonna. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, is it non-patriotic if I do like live coverage from us waiting to drop off our ballot, or can I do it?
No, I think that's back to what we were talking about with our like TikTok generation, that you got to like use your voice, and if you got a if you're going to magnify your voice by live stream, then let's do it.
Yeah, I agree. Citizens, share what you think it means to be a citizen and a neighbor in your area. I used to say email me, but I don't think people are into email these days. So find me on the Instagram, this Jess, THISJES. That's also my email. I'm on Gmail. Please share this podcast with your friends all over the country so they can learn about the positions and the questions and history lessons, as well as current happenings, and maybe even be inspired to start their own informative podcast. This has been your friend Jess with my good friend Rachel. Thank you so much for talking about PA question number 2. Rachel, will you lead us out with the catchphrase?
How are you being neighborly these days?
This is the tricky one. Everybody gets hooked up on this, and like I need to bring it up in the beginning.
No, I'm like Mr. Rogers now. I got it. I'll see you around the neighborhood.